Marvel's new show, What If, is debuting this week. Hey, I've got an interesting what if. What if Disney Plus didn't release all their shows in the middle of the night? That'd be cool. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of the first 3 episodes of the new MCU animated show, What If. 3 episodes were sent to critics as a preview for review, so this is going to be a non-spoiler review other than the premises of these different episodes, which have largely been shown in trailers, etc. So if you don't want to even know what the premise of any of the first 3 episodes is, then don't go any further, but I'm not going to go into exactly what happens and what these alternate histories entail, because that's part of the fun of this show. So don't worry, other than the basic outline of what these 3 episodes are about, this will be a non-spoiler review. A lot of times, especially with these Disney Plus shows, I've talked about the fact that I'm not as up on the comic lore when we get into things like Mephisto and the TVA, things that were established in previous comic books and shows like WandaVision and Loki. But What If is a show that I can speak on because this was one of my favorite comic books growing up. It was actually published in 2 different volumes. There was one that was published from 1977 to 1984, and then there was one that was published from 1989 to 1998. And so when I was collecting comics, I was collecting the version of What If that was being run, new issues at that time, but I was also going back and looking at old issues of the comic book, and it was always one of my favorites. I remember there were a lot of Saturday afternoons where I would be looking in the long boxes to see what were the back issues of What If that the comic book store had, and which ones could I afford, which ones had stories that I was interested in. There's one in particular that I've kept. This comic book cover has always been one that's just stuck in my head. And when I think about What If, I think about this comic book cover because this is so much of what that series was all about. If you don't know what the basic premise of it is, the premise of the comic book and the premise of the show is that it is hosted by the Watcher, who is an omnipotent being that is literally a watcher who cannot interfere but can see every possible multiverse and every different branching timeline in the Marvel Universe. And in each issue of the comic and now each episode of the show, he will present an alternate history of some of the characters that we know and love. And the great thing about What If is that all bets were off. There was no tone that they had to hew to. There was no continuity that they had to follow. The comics could be really silly, and oftentimes there would be little one-page panels that would just tell a silly little story. Or they could change continuity drastically and make different heroes, put them in different roles. But the thing that always fascinated me, and I guess this is kind of a dark fascination, is that the comic could be extremely dark. You could rack up body counts. You could kill off fan favorite heroes. You could destroy the world if you wanted to, because there were no ramifications. At the end of each issue, the slate is essentially wiped clean, and these events didn't actually happen. And it was really freeing because you could see these comic book writers basically being told there are no sacred cows. You can do whatever you want. Things can be unfair. Things can be dark. The bad guys can win. The good guys can lose. And I always thought that that was so interesting. It's kind of this flirting with the dark side that the actual canon Marvel Comics often couldn't do, at least without going back and reversing course and doing everything as a do-over later on down the line. Of all the new MCU shows that were announced in that batch, and Hawkeye and WandaVision and Captain America / Falcon and the Winter Soldier, this was the one that I was the most excited about because it had these untold promises. You get to go to these corners of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Where would we go? What characters would we see? And that's the promise of each individual episode. You never really know what to expect. As I mentioned, there were 3 episodes that were sent to critics to review. The first one is the one that is taking the forefront in the marketing campaigns. It is a what if story centering around Agent Carter, Peggy Carter, taking the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers. So it's this alternate World War II story where the Captain America that we know and love didn't exist, and instead we had super soldier Peggy Carter. Episode 2 is one where instead of Peter Quill being abducted from Earth, T'Challa is abducted from Wakanda, and he becomes Star-Lord. And this is an interesting episode, but it's also tinged with sadness because there are so many of the actors from the Marvel Cinematic Universe that come back to voice their characters. And in multiple episodes, Chadwick Boseman returned to voice T'Challa / Black Panther. And so these episodes of What If are actually the last Chadwick Boseman performances that we as an audience are going to get. And so it's great to hear him performing this role, but it is tinged with the sadness to know that this is the last we're going to get to see of Chadwick Boseman in this role or any other role. But I think it does add a sort of special quality to this second episode, in addition to it being a pretty solid story. Episode 3 gets a little bit more into the darkness that I hinted about with the comic book series, and it's also the one that the least has been revealed about in the previews, etc. So I'm not really going to say what episode 3 is about. All I'll say is that it takes place in that roughly 1 week window where canonically Iron Man 2, Thor, and the Incredible Hulk all happened almost simultaneously, and it is an alternate history retelling of the assembling of the Avengers, bringing in a lot of key faces. The story definitely goes into some very surprising places, and it really maximizes what I was talking about, where you can change anything you want in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I really loved where this show went because there were some people coming back that I didn't expect to come back. It is a bit of a mystery. Of the 3 episodes that we saw, episode 3 was my favorite because it delved into the stuff that I love from the comics the most. But that's not to say that I didn't also enjoy the first 2. They just both kind of had similar structures of what if blank was the hero instead of blank. First, you have Peggy Carter as the super soldier. The action beats in this episode are really good, and I'll talk about the animation style in just a second. But I really liked how they showed her and her role in the fight against Hydra. I think she might actually get to do more actual fighting of Hydra in this episode of What If than Captain America got to do in Captain America the First Avenger. That was always one of my complaints about that movie, is that it sort of fast forwarded through the interesting parts, and you get to see a little bit more of that in this episode. There's surprising turns for Steve Rogers and what happens to him if he doesn't get the super soldier serum. So it's interesting to see where these paths diverge, and I think that this version is one, and there's already been some rumors that we may follow up on some of these universes. I would not be surprised if we returned to this universe where we have Peggy Carter as the super soldier, the equivalent of Captain America. They leave it open to some interesting new places to go. I'm betting in a second season of What If, which I'm imagining that we're going to get, we may get a follow-up to this episode. Episode 2, the T'Challa as Star-Lord episode, is really a great story of the impact of one person and how much the fates of the galaxy can be changed by the inherent goodness inside of just one hero. There are a lot of surprising turns for some big characters in the MCU whose fates are changed drastically by T'Challa taking the place of Peter Quill. And again, what I liked about this is it doesn't necessarily go where you expect. There's still some good action in this episode, some alt history, some fan favorite cameos, a lot of great stuff. And I really can't underscore how great it is as well that so many of the voice cast returns to this series, because you could get sound-alikes, and there are some sound-alikes because there are actors like Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson that did not come and do their voice work for their roles. And the people that got to replace them are serviceable substitutes, but it just adds that much more that if you see a character like Nick Fury on screen, if you see a character like Peggy Carter on screen, you get their actual voices. It just ties it in that much closer to the MCU. There are dozens of actors that do return to voice their roles, sometimes in surprise cameo parts, and so it just makes things feel even more connected to the MCU, like you are actually seeing an alternate history of these events. Judging by the previews that I've seen, the 6 remaining episodes that are on the docket look to be taking on characters like the Vision and Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Killmonger, and inserting them into very interesting ways in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I am excited to see what these alternate histories are, because again, you can really go anywhere at any time. There's no expectation of where the story's going to go, or like, oh, this character's safe, so you know what's going to happen to them. This is genuinely full of a lot of surprises. I don't think this is going to be the show that generates the urgency instant buzz like you had with Loki and WandaVision, where people are watching it the second that it comes out, and Twitter is immediately talking about, for the next 12 to 18 hours exactly what happened. I think it's going to be more of a slow burn where people are catching it maybe the day after, but I really think that people are going to dig these alternate histories because, as I said, they are interesting. It's not just resting on the premise or saying like, oh, we've got all the cast back, so we can kind of relax on the storylines. And I also dug the animation style. I think this is a very stylish looking show. It has the style sort of when you look at the different kinds of comic art, it looks a lot more like many of the graphic novels that I would read growing up, where they're more of the almost watercolor look, the paint look, as opposed to the ink and pencil look of a classic comic book. And I'm not saying that one style is better than the other, but it gives it kind of a special feel. It's stylized and yet still cinematic. And then, of course, the big storyline that it looks like they're going to be taking on in some way, shape, or form is Marvel Zombies, which I've always said, if they ever just said screw it and we're going to do a one-off, like 2-part MCU movie, I would like for them to do Marvel Zombies for the exact same reason that I like What If, because you can do whatever you want. And I hope that that's what they're going to continue to embrace as they make episodes of this series. Don't just rely on the fact that you have these great characters. Really push the envelope and go to some interesting places, because there is no governor on what you can do in this show. As I joked about at the top of this review, I don't know if this is going to be the show that you stay up until 2 a.m. or midnight or whatever time it is to watch. If you're here in the United States, some other folks in other places get it at a much more convenient time. But I do think it's going to be good enough to keep it near the top of your watch list. So maybe on that Wednesday morning or Wednesday night after work or school, when you're settling in to see what you want to watch, I think that What If is going to be one of the first things that you want to catch up on, because you just never quite know what's going to happen or what has happened in that episode. So it's a recommendation for me on What If. Like I said, it doesn't have the urgent consequences of the other shows that we've seen so far in the MCU, but it's also kind of nice to take a break from that and just have a little slice of episodic television week to week, where it's not about fan theories and speculation and wondering how this ties into the MCU. They're just these nice little pods, these alternate history stories, well animated, well voiced, well told, and I'm looking forward to catching up with the series after it goes through these 3 episodes that I've seen. I will be a loyal viewer of What If, and I'm hoping I'll be joined by some of my other What If fans out there. So that's my review of What If. Are you looking forward to the series? Or do you plan on watching it when it debuts later this week? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We are ramping up our watch-alongs, Schmodown study sessions, commentaries, Dan's Movie Club, lots of great stuff still to come in the month of August, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. But also, thank you for watching this video here on the channel. If you like what you see, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. We are growing the subscribers. We're getting close to 100K, and I'd love to keep that growth going through the summer and going into the fall. Thank you so much for watching this review. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.